I'll keep this glass and having this Kunafa chocolate. Whenever I have coffee, I just have the crave. I have black coffee usually. Oh shit. Yeah. So every time I have this, I just have a craving of uh, something sweet. And that is why I usually have some chocolate. Kala kapra kali car. Let's begin. Kala kapra kali car.
Okay, This new reading, principles of asset allocation. Principles of asset allocation. What is the focus or what is the focal point for this particular reading? So if you remember from level 1, level 2, we had done mean variance optimizer. What did we do? Mean variance optimizer to identify SAA. To identify SAA, strategic asset allocation, we had done mean variance optimizer where we learned about efficient frontier, inefficient portfolios, capital market line, security market line. All those concepts come under which umbrella? Mean variance optimizer. The goal was to figure out strategic asset allocation. This reading will start with that only, but now we will focus. The main focus of this particular reading is the pitfalls of that process. MVO process के pitfalls क्या थे? Okay, and after discussing those pitfalls, how can we overcome those pitfalls and apply it to the practical world, to real world portfolios? So mean variance optimizer, on the face of it, it looks very good. There is no doubt about that. It makes sense. It is logical. But उसमें थोड़े बहुत problems थे. वो problems discuss करेंगे. And how those problems can be overcome. How can we apply it to real world scenarios? Okay. So let's begin with this background now. So what is required for diversified asset allocation? दो चीजें required होती है. Asset allocation decision. Now, what do you mean by asset allocation decision? You should use the investor's objectives and constraints. Okay. Asset allocation decision क्या होता है? Investor का objectives and constraints use करके मैंने उसके लिए जो weights decide किए हैं, whatever weights I decide, considering the objectives and constraints specified by the investor in the IPS. Okay, and then I'm doing the allocation of the amongst the asset classes. The second one is implementation decisions. हर एक asset class में कौन सा asset खरीदना है, stock market में कौन सा shares खरीद. So पहले हम discuss करते हैं weight of each asset class, and then we discuss weight of each assets within each asset class. These two things are important for diversified asset allocation. Write down everyone, please, quickly. Moving forward now, let's try to understand what is mean variance optimization. What is required for this? You need to have capital market expectations. You need to do first what? Capital market expectations. क्या क्या लगेगा आपको? हर एक स्टॉक का मीन, हर एक स्टॉक का वेरिएंस, उसका कोवेरिएंस या फिर कोरिलेशन with other assets. The first important assumption is that investors are assumed to be risk averse, and investors will select portfolios which maximizes returns for a given level of risk. Investors will select portfolios which maximizes what? Returns for a given level of risk. Everyone knows this, nothing to be written down here. So investors are assumed to be risk averse, and every investor wants to maximize his utility. That is, for a given level of risk, he will always select portfolios with the highest return. Minimum variance frontier. If you remember from level 1, minimum variance frontier. Calculate risk and return for each portfolio by changing weights and considering all assets. What? Risk and return for each portfolio by changing weights and considering all the assets. So for दुनिया में जितने भी assets हैं, सब consider करो. सब asset का returns और risk plot करो. Risk on x-axis, returns on y-axis. Risk on x-axis, returns on y-axis. Plot the returns and risk for each stock, for each asset in the world, for every asset. Once you do that, then for a given level of return, which portfolio will you select? Portfolio with lowest risk or portfolio with highest risk? For a given level of return, which portfolios will you select? Portfolios with highest risk or portfolios with lowest risk? The obvious answer is portfolios with lowest risk. For a given level of return, you will always select portfolios with lowest risk. Okay, so हम लोग कौन से portfolio select करेंगे? ये returns के लिए, returns which I am marking. For this returns, this is the portfolio. For this return, this is the portfolio with lowest risk. For red, this is the lowest risk. Okay, so we are identifying for every level of return which portfolios have the lowest risk. We join those points and we get this curve. And this curve is known as what? Minimum variance frontier. What is this curve known as? Minimum variance frontier. Combination of such portfolios is referred to as what? Minimum variance frontier. We have already done this in level 1, level 2, so no need to write it down. If you are confident about this, there is no need to write it down. Next, efficient frontier. Again, we plot risk and returns, risk on x-axis, returns on y-axis. But this time, what we are saying is, for a given level of risk, which portfolio will you select? Portfolios with lowest returns or highest returns. For a given level of risk, for every level of risk, कौन से portfolio select करोगे? Portfolios with highest returns. There is no doubt about that. You select those portfolios. The combination of such portfolios is referred to as what? Efficient frontier. Combination of such portfolios is referred to as what? Efficient frontier. Everyone okay with this? Everyone okay with this? Clear up to this point? Quickly write it down, everyone, please. And this is again from level 1, level 2, just a quick revision. Efficient frontier का जो सबसे पहला portfolio है, the portfolio with the lowest risk, is known as global minimum variance portfolio. And minimum variance frontier का जो नीचे वाला part है, so efficient frontier is the upper half of minimum variance frontier. All the portfolios below efficient frontier are supposed to be known as inefficient portfolios. Am I clear with this? So to फटाफट लिखेंगे. We have done this in level 1, level 2, but this is important from level 3 perspective. It is discussed many times in this chapter. So everyone, please note down this much quickly. Okay, moving forward now. Minimum variance efficient frontier. Just 1 minute. Now, how to find portfolios on the efficient frontier? मुझे मेरा कौन सा portfolio select करना चाहिए? Okay. So one approach to finding the optimal point on the efficient frontier. Simple approach क्या है? ऐसा portfolio जो आपका utility क्या करेगा? Maximize करेगा. Now, how do we compute utility? They have created one formula portfolio that maximize utility using following equation. So आपको एक ऐसा portfolio ढूंढना पड़ेगा जो आपका utility क्या करेगा? Maximize करेगा. Now, how do we compute utility? They have created one formula portfolio that maximize utility using following equation. So आपको एक ऐसा portfolio ढूंढना पड़ेगा जो आपका utility क्या करेगा? Maximize करेगा. Utility maximize करने के लिए which portfolio? What equation should I use? They have given this one equation. They have not explained what is the logic behind this equation, but one thing is very simple. Utility will increase as returns increases. That logic is incorporated in this formula. जैसे जैसे portfolio का returns बढ़ेगा, मेरा utility, मेरा satisfaction बढ़ेगा. और जैसे जैसे वेरिएंस कम होगा या फिर जैसे जैसे वेरिएंस बढ़ेगा, जैसे जैसे क्या बढ़ेगा? वेरिएंस बढ़ेगा, मेरा यूटिलिटी कम होगा. सो रिटर्न्स बढ़ेगा, यूटिलिटी बढ़ेगा. रिटर्न्स बढ़ेगा, यूटिलिटी बढ़ेगा. वेरिएंस बढ़ेगा, यूटिलिटी कम होगा. वेरिएंस बढ़ेगा तो यूटिलिटी क्या होगा? कम होगा. That logic has been incorporated in this formula. But how this formula has been derived, that discussion is out of the scope of the syllabus. So you should always select the portfolio which will maximize your utility. Now, in this, they have considered risk and returns. is the investor's utility from investing in a portfolio with asset allocation. RM is expected return. Lambda is uska risk aversion. How risk averse investor you are. Okay, it's risk aversion coefficient. How much risk averse you are. Variance is everyone knows risk. In the above equation, if risk increases, keeping everything else constant, utility decreases. ठीक है, तो वो दो लॉजिक यहाँ पर ये फॉर्मूला में incorporated है. This formula you have to memorize to compute utility. This formula has to be memorized to compute utility. Everyone, please note it down quickly. Important formula है market star. Moving forward now. Constraints in the MBO process. Constraints in the MBO process. But before that, let's talk about lambda a bit. What is lambda? What is lambda? What is lambda capturing? It is capturing the risk averseness of an individual. How risk averse an individual is. उसको कितना रिस्क लेना है, कितना रिस्क ले सकता है. It is taking into consideration his willingness. It is taking into consideration his willingness and his capacity as well. Okay? And his capacity as well. So lambda considers, or lambda takes into consideration. Lambda takes into consideration willingness and capacity both. So willingness and capacity, so we can determine risk tolerance. That is what is taken into consideration by lambda. पहला point. दूसरा point, अगर investor risk neutral है, तो उसका lambda होगा 0. Then his lambda will be 0. But in reality, we assume lambda का value, it can be anywhere between 1 to 10. Average lambda is
4.
Average lambda is assumed to be 4. Average lambda is assumed to be 4. Okay. So these are certain properties about lambda. Lambda measures what? Risk aversion. How risk averse you, how much risk averse you are. So when you are a risk neutral investor, when you are what? A risk neutral investor, your lambda is 0 because you are not risk averse. So how can your risk aversion factor be positive? You are not risk averse, so you are risk neutral. Okay. But in general, the value of lambda is between 1 to 10 and average lambda is considered to be 4. Now, let's take a look at the constraints in an MBO process. Mean variance optimization process में, the constraints can be on weights of the asset class in the portfolio, returns of each asset class, and variance of each asset class. These are 3 typical constraints that we have in the MBO process. Utility constraint. The first important constraint is the portfolio asset weights must add to 100%. Everyone knows that. Okay, this is not utility constraint. This is also known as unity constraint or budget constraint. This is known as what? Unity constraint or budget constraint. Unity constraint or budget constraint. क्या बोलते हैं लोग? Portfolio के assets के weights के add होने चाहिए, 100% होने चाहिए. And the second important constraint is non-negativity constraint. Basically, हर एक asset का weight positive होना चाहिए. मतलब you should be long. That means no short selling is allowed. Weight should always be positive. Weights should always be positive. बहुत सारे और भी constraints हैं. We'll discuss those constraints as we move forward. But this is unity constraint or budget constraint and the non-negativity constraint. That you cannot take short position. Weights should always be positive. Write down everyone, please, quickly. Okay, moving forward now. MBO process. Now, what happens in a mean variance optimization process? The inputs that are needed are expected returns, basically capital market expectation, expected returns, variances, covariances, correlations, risk aversion factor, lambda, and the constraints. These are the inputs that are needed that you give to a particular software or a machine. The goal of the machine, the goal of the software, the goal of the MBO process, MBO optimizer, variance optimization. Uska ultimate end goal kya hai? To maximize your utility, which is subject to constraints. To maximize the utility subject to what? Constraints. That's what is the goal of the MBO process. Now the end goal is to input diya machine mein. And visualize this as a machine. So machine में input दिया sugarcane अगर, तो बाहर क्या निकलता है? sugarcane juice निकलता है. वैसे ही MBO machine में, okay, you give expected return, variance, covariance, constraints, and risk aversion factor as an input. The goal of the machine is to maximize the utility within the limitations of the constraints. What will be the output? Output क्या होगा ये machine का?
Allocation.
Output would be asset allocation, portfolio weights. हर एक asset में, हर एक पूरे portfolio में कौन से asset का कितना weights होगा? Portfolio का expected return and portfolio का variance. This will be the output of the MBO process. But ये process में, above process assume that all assets were considered in the world, there is a true risk-free asset. But level 3 में, हमने जब ये level 1, level 2 में पढ़ा था, हमने क्या बोला था? दुनिया में जितने भी assets हैं सब हम consider करेंगे. पहला point ये consider किया था हमने. और दूसरा point क्या बोला था हमने? दूसरा point हमने क्या बोला था? There is a true risk-free asset. But these assumptions will be relaxed in level 3. These assumptions will be relaxed in level 3. Write down everyone, please, quickly. Okay. Let's move forward now. अभी ये प्रोसेस में कुछ क्रिटिसिज्म थे. There are certain criticism of this process. First criticism is GIGO. What do you mean by GIGO? What do you mean by GIGO? Garbage input, garbage output. अगर आपके पूरे प्रोसेस में इनपुट ही खराब है, अगर आपके पूरे प्रोसेस में इनपुट ही खराब है, एक्सपेक्टेड रिटर्न्स, वेरिएंस, कोवेरिएंस, रिस्क अवर्जन फैक्टर, कंस्ट्रेंट, तो आपका एलोकेशन, एसिड एलोकेशन भी खराब ही होगा. सिंपल सी बात है, अगर शुगरकेन खराब है तो शुगरकेन जूस भी खराब ही निकलेगा. If the sugarcane itself is of bad quality, the sugarcane juice will also be of lower quality only. तो वैसे ही MBO प्रोसेस में अगर आपका इनपुट गार्बेज है, आपका आउटपुट भी क्या होगा? गार्बेज. Because if the input is not proper, the acid allocation cannot be proper. Second criticism of MBO process: concentrated acid class allocation. भी लोग क्या बोलते हैं? Ideally MBO process से, ideally MBO process से एसिड एलोकेशन क्या होना चाहिए? डाइवर्सिफाइड होना चाहिए. आइडियली एमबीओ प्रोसेस से एसिड एलोकेशन क्या होना चाहिए? डाइवर्सिफाइड होना चाहिए. बट दे से मेनी टाइम्स व्हाट हैपेंस इज यू कंस्ट्रक्ट अ पोर्टफोलियो एज पर एमबीओ. एमबीओ आपको जो पोर्टफोलियो बताता है काफी बार वो क्या होता है? कॉन्सेंट्रेटेड होता है. Am I clear with this? Am I clear with this? So many times your process, your portfolio that you get from MBO process could be concentrated in few assets and it might not contain many of the assets. Third criticism of MBO processes: skewness and kurtosis. What do you mean by that? MBO process में हम लोग खाली रिटर्न्स और रिस्क देखते हैं डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन तक. Returns and risk. Okay, returns is captured by mean and risk is captured by variance. But हम लोग डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन के स्क्यूनेस और कर्टोसिस को इग्नोर करते हैं. हम लोग इसको इग्नोर करते हैं, डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन के स्क्यूनेस और कर्टोसिस को कंप्लीटली इग्नोर करते हैं. We ignore what? The skewness and kurtosis of the distribution. But in reality, every distribution will not be a normal distribution. They will have certain kind of skewness and certain kind of kurtosis as well. Not necessarily they'll always be normal. In fact, they are never normal. In reality, most distributions are non-normal. Fourth point, risk diversification. Risk diversification. Diversification happens by investing in different asset class. अभी हम लोग क्या सोचते हैं हमेशा? अलग अलग asset class में invest किया, मेरा portfolio diversify हो जाएगा. If I invest in different assets, my portfolio will be diversified. That's what our assumption is. That's a fair assumption. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. If we invest in different portfolios, our portfolio will be. If we invest in different assets, our portfolio will be diversified. बट काफी बार क्या होते हैं? रिस्क ओवरलैपिंग होते हैं. काफी बार क्या होता है? एसेट्स में रिस्क क्या होते हैं? ओवरलैपिंग होते हैं. So although we invest in different asset classes, we believe that the portfolio will be diversified, but in reality, आपको चाहिए रिस्क डाइवर्सिफिकेशन. आपको खाली एसेट क्लास डाइवर्सिफिकेशन नहीं चाहिए. So diversification happens by investing in different asset class, but there could be a common source of risk which is difficult to diversify. तो आपको लगेगा आपका पोर्टफोलियो रिस्क से डाइवर्सिफाइड है, बट ऐसा हो सकता है कि आपके पोर्टफोलियो में जो एसेट्स है वो सब में एक कॉमन सोर्स ऑफ रिस्क है. फिफ्थ क्रिटिसिज्म ऑफ एमबीओ प्रोसेस इज इट इग्नोर्स द लायबिलिटी. हम लोग एसेट्स का पोर्टफोलियो तो बना रहे हैं. हम लोग क्या कर रहे हैं? एसेट्स का पोर्टफोलियो तो बना रहे हैं, बट हम लोग का एसेट का पोर्टफोलियो बनाने का एंड गोल क्या है? व्हाट इज द एंड गोल टू कंस्ट्रक्ट द पोर्टफोलियो ऑफ एसेट्स? The end goal to construct the portfolio of assets is to meet some future liability. Is to meet what? Some future liability. मुझे फ्यूचर में कोई लाइबिलिटी पे ऑफ करना है, इसके लिए मैं एसेट्स का पोर्टफोलियो बना रहा हूँ. एग्जाम्पल, एक एंडोमेंट फंड, एक यूनिवर्सिटी फंड को क्या पे करना है? अपने एक्सपेंसेस. चैरिटी को कुछ अलग पर्पस रहेगा, इंडिविजुअल्स का पर्पस अलग रहेगा. इंडिविजुअल्स को रिटायरमेंट के पे करना होगा. तो वो सब चीजें हम यहाँ पर एमबीओ प्रोसेस में कंसिडर नहीं करते हैं. वो सारी चीजें हम एमबीओ प्रोसेस में कंसिडर नहीं करते जो हमारा लाइबिलिटी है. इट इज कंप्लीटली इग्नोर. पेंशन फंड का लाइबिलिटी क्या होगा? अपने एम्प्लॉयज को पेंशन पे करना. तो आइडियली बेस्ट अप्रोच क्या रहेगा? जो वो लाइबिलिटी भी कंसिडर करता है. एंड द लास्ट वन इज सिंगल पीरियड फ्रेमवर्क. अगर आपके मल्टीपल टाइम होराइजन है तो वो एमबीओ प्रोसेस के थ्रू करना पॉसिबल नहीं, बिकॉज इट कंसिडर्स अ सिंगल पीरियड फ्रेमवर्क, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, whatever it is. Interim cash flows are not considered. It ignores what? Intermediate cash flows. Everyone write down this much, please, quickly. Very important section. Very, very important section, everyone.
What are the criticisms of MBO? Garbage in garbage. What are the criticism of MBO? Garbage in, garbage out. Risk diversification, concentrated asset class allocations. It ignores skewness and kurtosis. Basically, it is not appropriate for non-normal distribution. Ignores liabilities. Single period framework. Garbage in, garbage out. It ignores skewness and kurtosis. Concentrated asset class allocations. Risk diversification is not the same. Asset class diversification is not the same as risk diversification. It ignores liabilities. Needs to be considered in single period framework.
Down, please, quickly. Okay, moving forward now. Now, how do we solve these problems? That's what is the focus now. How do we try to overcome these problems? The first way to overcome is improving the quality of input, because अगर input अच्छा रहेगा तो ही आपका output अच्छा रहेगा. So we are trying to solve the problem of GIGO here, garbage input, garbage output. For that, so main problem is with expected return as an input. तो आप input जो देते हैं उसमें expected returns जो होता है, majority problem वहीं पर होता है, because constraints तो client के है, वो तो follow करना ही पड़ेंगे. Variance जो है, it is based on past data. Expected return is something which is based on your expectations. तो input का problem mainly वहीं पर होता है. For that they say use reverse optimization. Now what do you mean by reverse optimization? Generally इन लोग क्या बोलते हैं, मार्केट में जो एसेट के वेट्स है, मार्केट में एसेट के जो वेट्स है, तो हमने पहले क्या किया था, हमने एमबीओ प्रोसेस में क्या किया था? व्हाट डिड वी डू इन द एमबीओ प्रोसेस? हमने इनपुट क्या लिया था? एक्सपेक्टेड रिटर्न, वेरिएंस, कंस्ट्रेंट्स, कोरिलेशन, मैक्सिमाइज यूटिलिटी, एंड देन वी गॉट एसेट एलोकेशन. कौन से एसेट में कितना एलोकेट करना चाहिए, पोर्टफोलियो का रिटर्न्स, पोर्टफोलियो का रिस्क, ये तीन हमको आउटपुट मिला था. अभी इन लोग क्या बोलते हैं, rather than forecasting expected returns, आप ये पूरे प्रोसेस को उल्टा कर दो. आप क्या कर दो, ये पूरे प्रोसेस को उल्टा कर दो. एसेट एलोकेशन को है ना, जो मार्केट में जो वेट्स चल रहे हैं हर एक एसेट के, मार्केट में हर एक एसेट के जो वेट्स चल रहे हैं उसको आप अज्यूम कर लो इनपुट, वो करेक्ट है, आप ऐसा अज्यूम करो. बिकॉज मेजर प्रॉब्लम किसके साथ है? एक्सपेक्टेड रिटर्न के साथ में है. मेजर प्रॉब्लम इज विद व्हाट? एक्सपेक्टेड रिटर्न. आपको एक्सपेक्टेड रिटर्न पे भरोसा नहीं है, बिकॉज आपको लग रहा है वो इनपुट खराब है तो आउटपुट भी खराब आएगा. तो इन लोग क्या बोलते हैं, जो आपने एमबीओ प्रोसेस में किया था उसका उल्टा करो. इसके लिए इसको नाम क्या दिया? रिवर्स ऑप्टिमाइजेशन. व्हाट दे आर सेइंग इज यूज द एलोकेशन दैट इज देयर इन द मार्केट, यूज द सेम मार्केट वेट्स. तो इनपुट्स क्या रहेंगे यहाँ पर? अज्यूम द ऑप्टिमल एसेट एलोकेशन एज पर द मार्केट्स, वेरिएंस, कोवेरिएंस, रिस्क अवर्जन फैक्टर एंड कंस्ट्रेंट्स. Give that as an input to your MBO machine, maximize the utility, and then compute the expected returns. And those expected returns will be called as what? Implied returns. Those expected returns will be called as what? Implied returns. आप वो implied returns को आप input बना के फिर से MBO प्रोसेस में डालो. आ रहा है समझ में? तो मार्केट के वेट्स के हिसाब से, मार्केट के कंस्ट्रेंट्स के हिसाब से, मार्केट के वेट्स के हिसाब से और वेरिएंस, कोवेरिएंस और हमारे कंस्ट्रेंट्स के हिसाब से आपने एमबीओ प्रोसेस से क्या निकाला? इंप्लाइड रिटर्न्स. रिटर्न्स कैलकुलेट किया हर एक एसेट क्लास में और फिर वही रिटर्न्स इनपुट दिया फिर से एमबीओ प्रोसेस में. इंप्लाइड रिटर्न्स, वेरिएंस, कोवेरिएंस, कोरिलेशन, रिस्क अवर्जन फैक्टर, कंस्ट्रेंट, यही इनपुट दिया फिर से आपने एमबीओ प्रोसेस में टू मैक्सिमाइज द यूटिलिटी एंड सब्जेक्ट टू कंस्ट्रेंट्स. एंड देन यू विल गेट स्ट्रेटेजिक एसेट एलोकेशन, पोर्टफोलियो रिटर्न्स एंड पोर्टफोलियो रिस्क. कुछ नहीं है, बेसिकली किया क्या रिवर्स ऑप्टिमाइजेशन में, क्वालिटी किस पे खराब होता है, इनपुट क्वालिटी किस में खराब होता है, इनपुट क्वालिटी किस में खराब होता है, एक्सपेक्टेड रिटर्न में। उन लोग बोलते हैं एक्सपेक्टेड रिटर्न आप कैलकुलेट करो, assuming weights as per markets. Once you calculate the expected return, those returns will be called as implied returns, and use that implied returns as your input for MBO process. So rather than using expected return, use implied return as the input for MBO process. I hope I am clear with this. I hope I am clear with this. इसके वजह से आपका गार्बेज इनपुट गार्बेज आउटपुट का प्रॉब्लम थोड़ा बहुत सॉल्व हो जाएगा। ब्लैक लिटरमैन मॉडल इसी का एक्सटेंशन है। ब्लैक लिटरमैन मॉडल क्या है? इसी का एक्सटेंशन है। इट्स एन एक्सटेंशन ऑफ रिवर्स ऑप्टिमाइजेशन। खाली डिफरेंस क्या है? तो यहां तक तो रिवर्स ऑप्टिमाइजेशन है। डिफरेंस क्या है? इंप्लाइड रिटर्न्स जो आया, ब्लैक लिटरमैन क्या बोलता है, जो इंप्लाइड रिटर्न्स आया उसको आप थोड़ा अपना फ्लेवर ऐड करो उसमें। एनालिस्ट को वो इंप्लाइड रिटर्न्स को थोड़ा बहुत एडजस्ट करना चाहिए एज पर हिज एक्सपेक्टेशंस एंड एज पर द मार्केट कंडीशंस एंड एज पर हिज फोरकास्ट। एंड देन एडजस्टेड इंप्लाइड रिटर्न्स को क्या करो, एडजस्टेड इंप्लाइड रिटर्न्स को क्या करो, यूज करो। use what? Adjusted implied returns. Use what? Adjusted implied returns as an input. Use what? Adjusted implied returns as an input. So output that we got from reverse optimizer, reverse optimization run करने के बाद हमको जो output आया वो output था implied returns। वो implied returns को use that implied returns and adjust it as per your expectations. Adjust it what? As per your expectations. That's called as black litterman model. You can add your real world constraints, adjust it as per your expectation, and then use that revised implied returns, variance, covariance, risk aversion factor, correlation, constraints, वो सबको use करके वापस से MBO process run करो. You will get revised asset allocation, portfolio returns, and portfolio risk. What will you get? Revised asset allocation, portfolio returns, and portfolio variance. Am I clear with this to everyone? Am I clear with this to everyone? So reverse optimizer run करो, expected returns मिलेगा, implied returns जिसको बोला जाएगा, जिसको implied returns बोला जाएगा। implied returns में अपना flavor add करो as per black litterman what are his expectations, and then use that expected return, use that revised implied returns, variance, covariance, correlation as an input and run the MBO process again. Then you will get revised asset allocation, portfolio returns, and portfolio risk. So black litterman model and reverse optimizer both are used to solve the problem of GIGO, garbage input, garbage output. Okay, so after completing black litterman model, now we will take a look at an example, recommending and justifying an asset allocation using MBO. Very, very easy content, not at all difficult. Very easy example. Marsha Bronston has come to our investment advisor for help to determine an appropriate asset allocation. The advisor discerns in
I hope the स्ट्रीम बंद नहीं हुआ था.
So in this particular section, we are going to cover issues for individuals. We'll take a look at Monte Carlo simulation, its advantages, how liquidity considerations, how liquidity, asset class ka liquidity has an impact on asset allocation, how we tackle those things. So this is what the focus of this particular section is now. Different issues that an individual faces in relation to asset allocation, in relation to economic balance sheet and financial balance sheet. Let's take a look at that now. So till now, we only considered tradable financial assets. हमने खाली क्या देखा था MBO construct करते वक्त, while constructing the MBO, while the MBO construction, we only considered financial assets such as equities and bonds. हमने क्या consider किया था? Financial assets such as what? Equities and bonds. But एक इंडिविजुअल के पोर्टफोलियो में खाली यही नहीं होता, उसके पास सिग्निफिकेंट अमाउंट ऑफ ह्यूमन कैपिटल होता है. इन्वेस्टर्स दे डोंट जस्ट होल्ड बॉन्ड्स एंड इक्विटी. उनके पोर्टफोलियो में दे हैव सिग्निफिकेंट ह्यूमन कैपिटल एंड सिग्निफिकेंट वर्थ इज इन्वेस्टेड इन रेसिडेंशियल रियल एस्टेट, जहां पर हम लोग रहते हैं. तो हम लोग जब एमबीओ रन करेंगे, मीन वेरिएंस ऑप्टिमाइजर रन करेंगे हमारे क्लाइंट के लिए, हमारे इन्वेस्टर के लिए, we should take these assets into consideration. MBO should be adapted to incorporate these assets in analysis. Write down everyone please quickly. How to incorporate that we will discuss in the next slide, but everyone first write down this much quickly. Okay. Now, how to incorporate human capital in the MBO process depends on individual.
Hi guys, I'll just take a break. I don't know if this thing I can pause it or not. Hmm. I can't. Okay. I'll just take a break. I think enough streaming for today. My battery is also again going to die. So yeah, I'll just take a break. Thank you guys. See you. Bye.